The Israelis have not concluded what they're going to do in terms of a strike. That's under discussion. I think if I were in their shoes, I'd be thinking about other alternatives than striking oil fields.
Let's discuss this further with John Bolton, the former national security advisor during part of the Trump administration. Thanks so much for joining us. So President Biden was asked the same question yesterday, and his offhand answer yesterday sent global oil prices up and the stock market down. Let's play that.
Would you support Israel striking Iran's oil facilities, sir?
We're in discussion with that. I think that would be a little, anyway.
What he said now is clear. He doesn't want them to. He's suggesting that they should consider other alternatives. What do you think?
I think the president's making a huge mistake talking about any of Israel's possible options. Let's be clear. Iran is an enemy of the United States. It's been a state sponsor of terrorism since Ronald Reagan's administration. It's pursuing deliverable nuclear weapons, which could threaten us, Israel, and many of our other allies. It has armed and equipped units that have gone after Americans in Iraq for decades. It's currently trying to assassinate American citizens on our territory. Iran is an enemy of the United States. Israel is an ally of the United States. And what the president's doing is publicly telling an enemy what he thinks an ally should do. He should put a sock in it and stop talking about it. He may have his opinions on what Israel's response to the ballistic missile attack from Iran should be, but it should be a communication among allies. There's one explanation for this, and that's to put pressure on Israel and to try and create an echo chamber, a la the Obama administration, that he thinks can force Israel into action. I don't think that's going to happen. When Israel took out Hassan Nasrallah, the leader of Hezbollah, there was a poll in Israel that asked Israelis, do you think Israel should have consulted with the United States before killing Nasrallah? 83% said no. And I think that's what Netanyahu is going to do. I don't know what his decision will be, but I don't think he's going to listen to Joe Biden.
What do you think Israel should do?
I think it should take out Iran's nuclear weapons program. I think the United States should assist them. This is the moment to do it. This is the threat, the real existential threat to Israel. It's a small country, 6, 8, 10 nuclear weapons. There won't be in Israel. And nobody can say with confidence when Iran will have that capability. When the next ballistic missile coming from Iran toward Israel will have a nuclear weapon under the nose cone.
Biden also was asked if he thinks Netanyahu has not agreed to any diplomatic solutions because Netanyahu wants to influence the U.S. presidential election. Here's what Biden had to say.
No administration has helped Israel more than I have. None. 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 And I think Bibi should remember that. And whether he's trying to influence the election or not, I don't know, but I'm not counting on that.
What do you think?
I think the president should put two socks in it. This is the kind of conversation that you'd have about an adversary. It's the kind of conversation John Kennedy had when he suggested no Dean Diem maybe ought to look around to see what might happen to him that led to a coup in Saigon. You know, if you treat adversaries that way, that's one thing. But to do this to an ally is just incomprehensible to me unless it's part of that effort to pressure Israel, keep this story off the front page, keep American oil prices down. That's not thinking strategically in America's interest. It's thinking in Joe Biden's party's political interest.
Let me ask you about the 2024 election, just over a month away. You were a member of the Bush administration before you were a member of the Trump administration.
Two Bush administrations.
Two Bush administrations. George W. Bush has not endorsed in this election. His vice president, Dick Cheney, has. He's endorsed Kamala Harris. Liz Cheney has endorsed Kamala Harris. Paul Ryan and Mitt Romney have not endorsed. What's going on? I mean, it seems like the part of the Republican Party from which you come, traditional Republican, conservative, strong foreign policy, et cetera, is not behind Donald Trump. And some members, including, I mean, Dick Cheney is a pretty conservative guy, are supporting Kamala Harris because they think Donald Trump poses such a threat to democracy.
Yeah, I don't agree with that. I think Donald Trump's going to cause enormous harm in a second term, but he's not an existential threat. That overstates it. It's better, you don't want to understate it, you want to get it accurately. I'd say this generally. There are a lot of Republicans that don't like Donald Trump one little bit. And what they're going to do about it falls into three categories. Some like Dick and Liz, although we haven't heard from Lynn, Dick's wife, who is a strong-minded woman. I'm kind of curious what she's going to do.
She might actually even be more conservative than Dick.
Could be.
Yeah.
Some are going to vote for Harris as a matter of conscience. I respect that. Some of us, and I'm one of them, are going to write in somebody. That's a matter of conscience, too. And a lot of people are going to grit their teeth and unwillingly vote for Donald Trump because they think Harris is a greater threat to the country than Trump is. That's a matter of conscience, too. All the people who are criticizing the decisions people make should recognize that this really is a hard decision for a lot of people and grant them that they're doing it on the basis of conscience. I don't agree with voting for Harris. I don't agree with voting for Trump, but I respect that people are going through agony because of Donald Trump's inadequacies.
If you lived in a battleground state, would you write somebody in?
Yes, because I don't think either one are qualified. I think you have to make a threshold judgment whether somebody should even be close to the Oval Office, and I don't think either one qualify.
What about January 6th? How important do you think that should be to people when they vote?
Well, I think it's not just January 6th. It's a whole range of things Trump has said over a long period of time, including we should suspend the Constitution. I think he's very dangerous. I think it's going to be a retribution presidency if he wins. I think it's going to be a struggle. I think he could cause damage. And we're just going to have to be ready for it if he does win.
All right. Former Ambassador John Bolton, good to see you, sir. Thank you so much.
Kayla, the president is facing a lot of questions there amid these dangerous escalations and moves in the Middle East.
He is, and he has been for days, if not longer, Alex. President Biden facing questions today on exactly what response he sees as appropriate for Israel to take in response to the attack by Iran this week. He has said that he does not support Israel hitting Iran's nuclear facilities, and then he was forced to clarify a comment he made yesterday where he said that he appeared to leave the door open to supporting Israel hitting Iran's oil reserves, which today he said that he'd prefer that they not, essentially. But it's unclear whether Israel would abide by the advice that the U.S. is providing. U.S. officials have suggested that Israel is giving no assurances that it is, but he's also facing questions on why, after a year of this conflict, and in which time the U.S. has been feverishly pursuing a diplomatic solution to this conflict, Israel has instead intensified the conflict on two new fronts, both against Iran and against Hezbollah in Lebanon, in a war that was originally prosecuted against Hamas in Gaza. And Biden was asked in the briefing room whether he thought there was the potential that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu was trying to derail Democrats from being able to keep the presidency. Here's how Biden addressed that question.
No administration has helped Israel more than I have. None. 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 And I think Bibi should remember that. And whether he's trying to influence the election or not, I don't know, but I'm not counting on that.
Now, White House officials have acknowledged privately that Netanyahu faces a complicated political calculus of his own in his country, where a ceasefire gets mixed reviews. Alex.
Kayla Tausche at the White House, thank you so much for that report. And joining me now is Democratic Congressman Jason Crow of Colorado. He sits on the House Intelligence and Foreign Affairs Committee. Congressman, thank you so much for being with us. Some really interesting remarks by the president there. Remarkable that he did not really give a straight answer there on whether he thinks the leader of one of the U.S.'s closest allies, Israel, is trying to influence this election. Do you think that Netanyahu is trying to influence the 2024 election?
Well, I don't have any inside information. I think it's just conjecture about whether he is or not. What I do think is happening are two very troubling things. One is the continuation of an unacceptably high level of civilian casualties. You know, listen, we learned in our multiple decades during the war on terror that you cannot address a terrorist threat. You cannot bomb away a terrorist threat. You have to center and make a priority the protection of civilians and the dignity of all people. And so far, I have not seen that be a priority. And then the second is what appears to be lack of coordination by the Israelis and lack of any type of delineation of how they're going to finish this, what their end game is and what their end goal is, which after a year remains unclear.
And we have these three different fronts, essentially: Gaza, Lebanon, and now Iran. And my colleagues Kylie Atwood and Jennifer Hansler are reporting that in terms of the Israeli retaliation against Iran, the administration has not gotten assurances that Israel will not target Iran's nuclear facilities. President Biden has said that he hopes that they will not. Do you think the U.S. has lost its ability to influence Israel?
I think that would be an overstatement. I mean, listen, Israel has a right to defend itself. I've consistently said that. I condemn the attacks by Iran on Israel, and I've supported the security umbrella and the air defense collaboration between the United States and Israel to respond to those attacks by Iran and the rocket attacks by Hezbollah and others. At the same time, there does need to be a greater level of coordination by Israel. I mean, we are trying. We are sending emissaries over. We are attempting to figure out what their strategy is. There has to be more information by Israel because they exist. They live under the U.S. security umbrella. Make no mistake about this. I mean, they have their own military, they have their own Air Force, but ultimately it's the U.S. security umbrella that makes a lot of that possible. If there is a wider regional conflict, the risk of us being pulled into that conflict is extremely high. So I again will call for Israel, as the president and the administration has repeatedly, to coordinate more closely with us.
Congressman, you famously served in Iraq and Afghanistan. Now we have a conflict watchdog telling CNN that Israel's bombardment of Lebanon is, quote, the most intense aerial campaign outside of Gaza in 20 years. Last week, Israel carried out 3,000 strikes in Lebanon over 2 days. The U.S. carried out fewer strikes than that most years in Afghanistan. So the question is, are you comfortable with the scale of this war?
I'm greatly uncomfortable with the level of civilian casualties. Listen, there's no modern precedent for the ability to defeat a terrorist threat with military force alone. In fact, you can actually make a terrorist threat worse over time by fueling the extremism, fueling the despair, fueling the underlying groundwork that leads to extremism and to terrorism if you don't give people hope and dignity. And that's why I've been pushing for Israel and for Prime Minister Netanyahu to come out and clearly state there must be a two-state solution, there must be peace, they're going to respect the rights and dignity of all people, and then we're going to work backwards from there and figure out what we need to do to establish security and to make sure that the state of Israel is secure as well. But until we have that end goal clearly stated, I just see this continuing in perpetuity, and that is just not an acceptable result.
Yeah, shows no sign of ending. So much going on in the Middle East. Congressman Jason Crow, really appreciate your thoughts this evening.
Jim Sciutto is with me here in Tel Aviv, obviously south of Beirut. General Mark Hertling also joins us. So Jim, let me just start with you. You know, when we talk about this imminent strike that Israel is determining its targets and keeping very close to the vest, even from its closest ally, there are a lot of strikes. Possible strikes that Israel could hit inside Iran, nuclear locations, oil installations, the actual regime itself, which a lot of people in this country have been pounding the table saying this is our moment to behead the monster as they see it. Can you walk us through what these targets could be?
Listen, perhaps a combination, right, of some of these targets. Let's begin with nuclear, and there are multiple nuclear sites around there. Around Iran. And by the way, that's deliberate because they don't want them all in one place, because they don't want it easy to be taken out, their facilities to be taken out in one blow. Let's zero in on one of them in particular, Isfahan. This is a nuclear research facility, production facility. Isfahan, in the central part of Iran, they produce uranium metal, key to the production of nuclear warheads, if Iran were to go that path. Also centrifuge parts, which you need to produce the uranium, enriched uranium, to produce a nuclear weapon. What's notable about this is that in April, following Iran's last major missile barrage on Israel, when Israel did retaliate, it was Isfahan, not the nuclear site, but a air defense installation around Isfahan. That was Israel's retaliation at that point. And that was deliberate because they were showing we can reach out and touch you there.
Right.
In the event that we were to decide.
And it's a big place, but we can be very specific.
Exactly.
And so, to show that point, they can pick and choose within that
and
location.
they have the range to do so. And by the way, to carry out an attack on a site like that, you would have to take out the air defenses first. Another option is to go after oil facilities, oil refineries, et cetera. I want to talk about one in particular, that is Karg Island. Karg is an oil export facility. This is where 90% of Iran's oil is exported through here. So this would be an enormous blow to what is Iran's #1 source of revenue. Iran sends out about 3% of the world's oil. That's 2 million barrels of oil a day. It's not the entire market, it's a sliver of the market, but you know the oil markets well. If you take out that percentage, that's going to have an impact on oil prices. So certainly an impact on world oil markets, but also potentially the world economy and the U.S. economy.
Right, and both of those sorts of strikes would certainly move the line forward and change the game in terms of what's on the table. And when you talk
100%.
about escalation, and General Hertling, that's the big question. If you're Prime Minister Netanyahu and his war cabinet tonight making these final decisions, what do you do for targets like Jim just laid out? What kind of force, what kind of weaponry will Israel use in these potential strikes?
Well, first of all, Aaron, you have to look at the target package. And Jim and I talked about this earlier today. What will Israel go after? There are a variety of target packages. You've named a couple. I would name a couple more. How about weapons construction facilities, places where they build ballistic missiles and even the drones that have become so prevalent? And not only the attacks on Israel, but also the sale of drones by Iran to Russia for the attacks on Ukraine. Would it be hurtful to Ukraine to not worry so much about the energy production facilities, but in fact to hit their main weapons facilities, the places that build the weapons? And that's why I think that the president said what he said today. You know, you can hit an energy facility, either oil or a nuclear power plant or some of the other storage facilities that Iran has. But what would be more damaging in terms of Iranian potential in the future? Their two main proxy groups, Hamas and Hezbollah, have been very damaged. You know, the Israelis have basically destroyed Hamas. They've taken out 25 of 27 battalions in the Gaza Strip. They're now going after Hezbollah. They know they have a lot of missiles there. They don't want the resupply of those weapons. So when you get back to your question, was what would the strike package look like? It depends. It depends on what they're going after. If it's weapons facilities, those are strike fighters going in with a lot more than just aircraft that are dropping bombs. You have to have fuelers, you have to have intelligence gatherers, jammers, and electronic warfare aircraft to pave the path for a bunch of fighters to go in and bomb the locations you're talking about. And depending on the target, if it's a soft target, if you will, like Jim said, Karg Island, it's very easy to bomb a storage plant or a storage facility for oil. It's much tougher to strike some of the nuclear capabilities that Iran has had in the past because they are mostly deeply buried in the mountains and they are very well spread apart. It takes a much bigger package.
Right. I mean, and that's the thing. All this has to be planned out, right? It isn't just, you know, what Iran did when they fired the missiles here was, you know, pick a missile package, put your targets and go. I'm not saying that's simple, but Israel's going to be a combination of different fighters and different planes and different bombs and different missiles. I mean, it's a more complicated project.
And putting those flight crews at risk as well, right? Because you got to get those assets there and get them back safely. So there's that factor.
Now, when you talk about oil facilities, nuclear facilities, there's also been, and we reference this, a lot of talk in this country about what they believe is a once in a generational or more opportunity to take out the leadership of Iran for regime change. They've shown they can do it with Hezbollah. They've shown they can do it with Hamas. And they want to do it with the leadership of the Iranian government itself.
And that's, of course, the most extreme option would be regime change. And by the way, part of a public discussion in this country. Whether the leadership decides to go that way, that's certainly part of the public discussion here. But there are options short of regime change, which it's not even clear they could accomplish, which would be to go after military command and control, specifically the IRGC, the Iran Revolutionary Guard Corps, which is essentially the regime's military arm. Right, and this is one of the, well, this is the Revolutionary Guard headquarters in Tehran, a heavily populated area, but of course Israel has not hesitated to go after targets inside heavily populated areas. We're seeing it in Beirut now, we've certainly seen it in Gaza. And one could make a connection here, if you're Israel, to the attacks that took place a couple of days ago here, that center is a command and control center for those very strikes. So you could draw a direct line between the strikes on Tuesday and that as a potential retaliatory target.
Incredible, though, a strike within the heart of Tehran itself. Certainly something they're capable of doing. But again, completely changing the game. General, in that context, the top State Department official today telling CNN that Israel's not assuring the U.S. they won't strike nukes, that they're keeping their plans close to the vest. Obviously, the U.S. is on the hook for whatever Israel does, for the repercussions of it. The U.S. is expected to be there. Are you surprised that they're not more sharing? Does it say anything to you at this point that there is not?
It does say something to me, Aaron, and it says to me that our allies are being increasingly wary of sharing intelligence with some of the officials in government. And it's not just the United States, it's across the world. Operational security is critically important in these kind of strikes. So as soon as you tell someone the potential of a leak that would damage the potential for targeting just rises exponentially. And I think that's what a lot of our allies are doing. You know, we've seen the Ukrainians go into Kursk. They didn't tell people where they're going. We've seen strikes inside of Beirut by the Israelis, and then now the incursion in the southern border. It's just probably best if military plans and operations are not shared by governments with other governments until you really have a trustful eye. I believe that there are some in our government that know exactly what's going on and they have inside information, but they're certainly not sharing it with others.